And thank you all for joining us. We are super excited to be finally talking about the Watershed Framework. We've been doing it for a while, and our members have been asking for a workshop for a long time. And so finally, here we are. And to just put a finer point about Watershed Solutions Network. So we are a network of land and water stewards. We have about 150 members, many of whom have gone through an intensive cohort experience that we provided and that we hope to provide again in the future. And our foundational work has been to build diverse leadership capacity and expand collaborative capacity in the land and water sectors. And we also are very much excited to introduce people to systems thinking and to help folks apply that to their work. So the but now I have to figure out how to change my, oh, there we go. So I should also say the drawing that you saw on the front page and this drawing here were created by Adrian Covert, who is with the Bay Area Council, in case anyone knows him. But he hand drew these as we were going through this process to create the framework. And I think one of the other things that we try to do is we try to encourage folks to use different means of expression, because sometimes your thoughts and ideas change if you're exploring them through things like art. So the challenges that we were working to address when we were imagining the framework were the challenges of extreme conditions. And in particular, at the moment that we were doing this, we were having extreme weather that was creating many challenges for communities and infrastructure around the state. And what we observed is that our ability to respond was being hampered by fragmented agencies, and basically our human infrastructure was impeding our ability to respond at scale in an efficient and timely manner. And so we were trying to figure out how do we create system resilience. And one of the things that we landed on early on was the need for our human systems to align with our natural processes. And this is all founded on the belief that our ability to do that will make us more resilient. So when I very first joined Watershed Solutions Network, I reached out to the Water Foundation, and I had just come from the governor's office, and I had spent a lot of time working on drought and then on forest issues, both very emergent and emergency type issues. And so I approached them and I said, can you just give us a little bit of money to be able to imagine how we might do this aligning of human systems with natural systems? How could we get to watershed scale? So they generously funded a process where we convened 25 advisors that included land, water, and community practitioners. You can see the list of folks who participated in one way or another. And we got them together and on Zoom because it was during COVID, and I just asked the question: so how do we get to watershed scale? How do we connect people from headwaters to outflow, including the engineered parts of the system? And to be quite honest, we all looked at each other and there were crickets. And ultimately we agreed that we didn't have the answer. All these smart people together, and we didn't have a good answer to the question. And so what we were able to do as a group is to agree on a set of principles. I should also mention before I move on that the folks who participated were not representing their organizations. They participated as individuals. We share their organizations, just so you know the diversity of folks who were at the table. And none of them, we wanted to do this in a way that people felt like they could be candid and engaged and not, and not necessarily put their logo on something. So just so you understand the process and how we got here. But that group of folks came up with this set of principles. The first and most important, that time is of the essence. There was a very strong sense of urgency when this group was convened and having its discussions. A belief that interconnected and coordinated actions across a watershed can produce more powerful human interventions, or basically we can do more, we can do better together. That in order to get there, one of the most important things we're lacking is trust, and that should be a foundational element of how we get to watershed scale. And we all acknowledge that equity is a basic California value reflected in many of our policies and programs. Water should be affordable, and that coordinating and collaborating provides opportunities to reduce cross-jurisdictional and cross-sector redundancies. This was actually a fascinating conversation among this group, imagining the efficiencies that could be that we could achieve together if we weren't. And I love to imagine myself, not imagine actually, I love to think of myself as the ratepayer that I am, that's paying a whole bunch of different rates to different agencies that don't usually talk to each other. And so I'm paying one agency to do something that sometimes is in conflict with an agency that I pay to do something else. Like, are the energy utilities sometimes are doing things that are counter to my water, the health of my watershed that I rely on for my water. And so we had a great time imagining the efficiencies and the opportunities in better coordinating activities across jurisdictions and sectors. And that there's the opportunity to refocus on making good things happen. When we're fragmented, it's so easy to feel like we're working against each other or we're in competition with each other. But all of a sudden, when we're coordinated, it frees us up to focus on the good things that we can do together, though, making progress and creating more opportunity as opposed to fighting over resources. The group also was very conscious of the potential for people to fear that there would be some backroom body of people, set of people who would be making decisions for everyone. And so the group agreed that this had to be based on transparency and accountability, and that the how of it, it's that you'll see that in our framework, there's never the word governance. It's really focused on building relationships, understanding, and the capacity for coordinated action. And then I love the last principle, which is everyone is a land and water steward, because that so changes who you expect to see at the table. So ultimately, what the group did was to identify a set of activities that we think are a good place to start for a watershed to figure this out together. You'll see it's designed as an infinity symbol because one of the other things that we acknowledged is that this doesn't succeed if it's project by project. This requires developing perpetual relationships, and there's no beginning or end because every watershed is in a different place with different needs. And so we developed this set of activities and encourage anyone who wants to pick this up and apply it to start wherever they are. It may be that there's already some good human infrastructure in place, but really where you have opportunity is building a watershed budget, and so leap to that. This is not designed to say you must do step one and step two and step three. This is really designed for folks to look at and consider what would be most helpful in a particular region. And so that's where we landed, and that's the way the framework is structured. And now we're in the phase of test driving the framework. We've started conversations in the Tuolumne watershed. Those have been in fits and starts for a number of reasons. And where we've made the most progress is in the Upper Feather, connecting the Upper Feather region with Southern California. And so this is a great WSN story too, because the our core leadership are a bunch of WSN cohort alums. Trina Cunningham, who was part of cohort 5 and is a mountain Maidu leader up in the Upper Feather region, and Nick Wobbrock, who was part of cohort 2 and is with Blue Forest, and Jen Nevels, who is also part of cohort 2 from Metropolitan Water District. And in fact, Nick and Jen actually met each other in cohort 2 in WSN, and some of this work has grown from that seed that was planted. So, as Watershed Solutions Network was figuring out how to start this conversation, about a year and a half ago now, we had a meeting of leaders in the upper watershed. To be honest, I thought that it was going to be the hardest to recruit the upper watersheds to participate. And interestingly, it was the opposite. It's been heartening to see how much the upper watersheds are already organized and already interested in building relationships. But we had a great meeting with folks in the upper watershed. The way that we work is we start with the people that we know and we do a snowball. So we reached out to all the folks we knew in the upper feather and we asked them who else should be part of this conversation. And we had a great group up in Greenville that got together. And that the purpose of that first conversation was to talk about the priorities that folks in the watershed hold, and just to pose the question, would you be interested in and willing to meet up with folks from Southern California? And so that got a good response. And then as we talked to folks, we really got the impression or the message that there was interest in having the integrated regional water management group be the group that we coordinated with. It's the only group that covers the entire region. It has the advantage of having local government representatives. So it has county supervisors on the governing body. It also has tribal representation and representation from many of the NGOs that are working in the region. So that's where we picked up, and I'm not gonna get to the punchline here because our panel is there are all the right people to talk about how this has been evolving and developing. But it's the awesome thing that I've been really impressed by is the Upper Feather region. I mean, this map that you see, that I don't know how long it's been around, but it's been, oh, actually, Christy can tell us. Christy, put in the chat, how long has this been around? Um, the region comes with its own toolbox that we've been happily leveraging. We just were with folks from Southern California and provided each one of them with a copy of this map. And this is just a section of it. It's a much bigger and very pretty map that perhaps we can share with folks after the workshop. So I think the piece that we have really been leveraging in this test drive is helping folks from Southern California to appreciate both how they benefit from the region, that there are people in the region who are actively stewarding it and by virtue doing, benefiting the folks in Southern California. And we're really inviting them to appreciate that as Southern Californians who rely on the water that comes out of the watershed, they actually benefit most if the watershed as a whole is healthy. And so that's where we've been, and that's what we've been doing. And I'm going to stop the presentation here, and over to our panel. I'll also mention while we're shifting to the panel that, well, first off, if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, please do. Again, we're sharing the watershed that we're joining from, and anything you'd like this group to know about you as a human and your organization if you feel if that's of interest. So I would like to welcome to the proverbial stage Nick Wobbrock, Liz Crosson, Trina Cunningham, and Paul Roen. And Paul, unfortunately, is in the field, so you will hear his voice. You will not see his face. But I'd like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, and maybe we'll start with Trina.
Sorry for that pause with the mute button. I was just reading Geneva and Jordan's introduction from Genesee to um, Valley Ward Creek and Indian Creek, my homelands. um, so, hello everybody. My name is Trina Cunningham. I am Mountain Maidu from Yatomo Genesee Valley. That's where I was raised at, and my dad was raised at. His mother, her some of her ancestors, and then in differing parts of primarily the Upper Feather River watershed, with marriages to in Pitt River, Washoe, Concow, Miwok, further back. I became part of this process knowingly. um, I'm not quite sure. I joined the IRWM in 2009. One of my elders and mentors, Lorena Gorbett, had been part of the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensures, and had gone to numerous meetings all of her life, had served on multiple boards. And in 2009, she had wanted to spend more time with her daughter in the winters, at that time in Arizona, and with her grandchildren, and wanted to step down from the IRWM, and asked if there was anybody else that wanted to step up. And I was in the meeting and raised my hand immediately and looked around, and nobody else raised their hand. And so I was in as a tribal representative at that point, and have served since then. In 2013, we held a TEK symposium in Genesee Valley on the ranch that my dad's great great grandfather built in the mid 1800s or 1865 ish, probably 1870 during the Allotment Act period, and that was the Dawes Act was 1866. So in that era, when properties became privatized, and so there was a huge oak tree there, and it was probably the first time we'd had a meeting with different people at that time. And TEK at that time was being thrown around and widely misunderstood, and still is widely misunderstood. But we were like, what is TEK and how would we practice it? What does it mean to us in place? And so we planned this event with multiple non-governmental organizations, Chico State, Department of Anthropology, some of our tribal elders and youth. So we had a planning team for a year, and the U.S. Forest Service, Plumas National Forest was a planning partner. And we had this event. I had returned to college and was attending Chico State, and was immersed in academia, and really needed to be around tribal people who understood tribal languages and nuances of existence and being. I didn't have to explain everything, and I was out of my head in academia that the majority of the time had nothing to do with Native existence, and the languages and concepts are just so foreign, and there's very little connection. So I called a friend of mine and said, "Hey, I'm dying here. I need to be immersed in tribal abundance and people." And he said, "Well, there's an event coming up at Las Vegas. I could get you in there." And I was like, I need to be in my own homeland too. I need to be in the trees and hear the water, and to be in those places. So it was at that moment that I was like, well, why don't we have this event at this place and invite everybody, the agencies and everybody there, and camp out in that place and have this event there and be informed by the tree, and by the land and by the water, and see the stars at night and feel the heat of the sun or the breeze or whatever is there. Why would we go to Las Vegas when we're talking about the land in Genesee Valley? And so we did that, and so we planned it and had that event, and part of it too was this huge distrust between the Native community and agencies. And my dad was a logger, and I grew up hearing pretty horrible stories about the Forest Service and logging, and just some pretty brutal interactions and distrust, and how ecosystems were being ruined or destroyed, and clear cutting and all of these things. And so my concept of distrust, was pretty good, but then also things were changing where some of my own relatives worked for these agencies, and I knew they were really, really good people. And some of my really closest friends worked for these agencies, and I knew they were really, really good people. And so it's like there's some policy issues or barriers or some misunderstandings that are really happening here. And so it's like, well, let's come together. Let's just invite everybody that has a stake in this place, including the rancher that held the lease there. It was on a land trust property owned by a land trust who had very little. It's like we own the property, but we have very little stewardship of the property. And but then the non-governmental organizations, neighbors, let's invite everybody here. And at that point, I didn't realize there was a difference between state fish and wildlife and federal fish and wildlife. It was only when we started inviting people and they showed up, and I'm like, oh, didn't know there was a difference. And the forest supervisor, he came, and we'd set up these tables under this giant oak tree that in my childhood, when my dad and his brothers and cousins had gone deer hunting, that's where they would hang their deer and let them hang for a few days before they would skin them out and start processing them. And so us as children would climb up the trees and jump on the hoods of the trucks because we thought that was great fun, and we knew that oak tree in a different way. And so now here we are, the first time that oak tree was being loved and honored as a Hamsi-cham, as an acorn tree, and providing shelter, and having food served under it, and prayers said, and songs sung, and people just gathering and chatting and talking about things that are important to us, and talking about, how do we as tribal communities with these elders and these youth participating, and these community members that are representing agencies, and how do we all get along, and what does this mean to us? What are the restrictions as California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the federal Fish and Wildlife, as a land trust, as a nonprofit, as a tribal, non-federally recognized, as a federally recognized tribe, as an elder, as a youth, and how do we build strengths out of those things, and how do we take care of this place that we're in right now? Let's come down to this place right here. How do we do that? And so the forest supervisor came up, and I introduced him to my dad, who was sitting there. And my dad was he was a very funny person, very strong. And so they introduced themselves, and my dad looked up at the forest supervisor because he was already sitting. They shook hands, and my dad said, well, you guys are the reason that we're in this mess that we're in. And the forest supervisor, I'd already built a rapport and a relationship with him. I'd worked with him all summer. And he said, yep, that's why we're here. He didn't skip a beat. He said, that's why we're here, to address things and make it right. And sat down next to my dad and addressed those barriers and those inequities. And by the end of the 3 days, they were best buddies, telling jokes. And at the end of that time, we talked about invasive species, star thistles. We talked about repopulating fields and areas with wild onions and potatoes. We talked about agriculture, modern systems. We talked about fencing and wildlife and predatory species and all these things that we could do on that landscape. But what it really came down to were the springs on the property and the water. And it was like, well, if we don't take care of these springs and if we don't take care of this water, it doesn't matter what else we do in this place. Um, it doesn't matter if we're not taking care of the water. It doesn't matter what else we do. Everything else is going to fail. And so that was the common outcome that remains so strong to me. And so every meeting that I went to subsequently was like, if we don't take care of the water first, whether it's fire, cultural burning, you know, policy and management of anything, if we don't take care of the water, then it doesn't matter what else we do. So really, that's the story, and that's what brought me to the table.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you for so beautifully illustrating so many important things, importance of place and human relationships and showing up. Why don't we move on to Paul? Are you at in a point where you can talk to us, Paul?
Yep, no worries, Debbie. Thank you. Yeah, I am Paul Roen. I'm a Sierra County Supervisor as well as a rancher here in Sierra Valley. I came here in 1995, and we became very active in the community immediately. And at that point, probably some of you remember the Irrigated Lands Program, which was enacted somewhere, I'm not even sure, somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we formed a community group that took exception to the fact that we were being accused of water degradation and all of those fallacies that were associated with livestock production. So we formed a group and we started doing monitoring. We started doing testing. We self-funded a lot of water testing for about 20 years. And through that program, seeing the effects that the state was bringing down on us and stuff, the two counties, the Sierra Valley is unique. It's split right in the middle by two counties, Plumas and Sierra, in the watershed. The watershed flows out of Sierra through Plumas and then down to Butte and down to the valley. So we through that coalition of organized producers and some professionals from UC Davis, we were proving that we were not a problem. So we actually, in parallel paths, then the IRWIM started to form. So we became very active there in both counties, local governments, and then the NGOs and everybody. And so out of some of the concerns of the allegations of water degradation, we formed the IRWIM to stay on the front of everything water in our region. And in parallel paths, then we continued to monitor and test our waters to the point where we finally got the water board to remove us from the program because we provided enough supporting documents that we're not part of the problem. And so we completely got removed from the irrigated lands program, the Feather River region of the state. So, and so then we moved forward through the IRWIM. We had the first Prop 1 approved plan approved throughout the state. We had a lot of quality, community input and stuff through that formation. And with that, the money kind of got pulled. I think we funded two projects that were, well needed projects within the two communities. One was in Plumas County, one was in Sierra County, I believe. And at that point, it kind of became stagnant because there was no money to push forward for projects. So it's kind of sat on the back burner until Debbie showed up and asked what I thought. And we started having conversations. And it just is the logical place for me to think that, it's got representation from throughout the communities and both counties. And so I just, by default, I think it was the organization that could show a benefit to this conversation.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just mention too that it's tricky building relationships sometimes. It helped that that we have a mutual friend with Paul who did our introductions. Um, so let's continue on with Liz.
Thanks, Debbie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Crosson. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Metropolitan Water District. But my work on watershed and watershed issues goes back about 25 years. I started out working in the NGO environmental space on forest health and forest resilience in the Klamath-Siskiyou in the Rogue watershed. I grew up actually in the Delta region of California, and now I find myself in Los Angeles working for Metropolitan Water District. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Metropolitan, it is the nation's largest wholesale water agency. So we were created almost 100 years ago, purely to import water into the Southern California region from the Colorado River, to really catalyze the growth into to what Southern California is today. And a couple decades later, in the 30s and 40s, we joined the state to build the State Water Project, which delivers water from the Upper Feather River and nearby watersheds through the Bay Delta into Southern California. So I have been at Met for about 3.5 years. This is a new role and one that I've been excited to be able to really help Met think about its long-term sustainability and resilience, and to really think about our mission of delivering water to Southern California in the context of the ecosystems upon which we depend, as well as upon which we've had major impacts. So I specifically came into this work really through Jen Nevels, who is also on this Zoom. She has championed really single-handedly the work of getting Metropolitan to really acknowledge the upper watershed and its importance to our long-term water supply and water quality. So I feel very fortunate to have been pulled into this effort to be able to meet people like Trina and Paul up in the upper watershed, and Nick, who's helping to, and Debbie, who are helping to facilitate such a meaningful partnership through all the way up through the watershed. And since we've started to engage with them and actually invest in some of these projects up in the Feather, we've been able to bring multiple of our board members from Metropolitan up into the Upper Feather River, as well as some of our other partners. We've also exposed other folks that import water from Northern California, other state, what we call state water contractors, to the Upper Feather. So I think, we're really in this nascent stage, but I think it's a really enlightening and promising stage of opening up Southern Californians' awareness of really, truly where their water comes and how important it is that we think about these systems, whether they're built or natural infrastructure, as something that we need to think about statewide, not as a divided state, but really as an interconnected state.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks for giving Jen the shout out too. All right, Nick.
Thanks. Well, hard to follow so much that's been shared, but really grateful to be here. My name's Nick Wobbrock. I'm part of cohort 2 of the Watershed Solutions Network. Used to be Water Solutions Network, and I love the intentional broadening of that. Started Blue Forest in 2015. It's a nonprofit, conservation finance nonprofit that looks to address these systemic challenges as well. And I'll share a little bit more about that. I'm a civil engineer by training and professionally before starting Blue Forest. And a lot of that is motivated, how might we look at watersheds like their ecological infrastructure? And how might the world be different if we were to fund restoration and resilience of natural infrastructure like we fund our built infrastructure? And how might that and expand budgets, expand certainty in success, achieve resilience. And the lens of how we often do that is to think about, well, what are the ecosystem services that are protected or enhanced from those restoration activities? So a little less of some of the discussion, well, what is a tree worth or what is a fish worth? I think that's often been the identification of when you're valuing ecosystem services. And we don't ask that question. Those things are of intrinsic value and they're of different value to different people. But how much a tree or a fish or sedimentation, instead the question might be how much would it cost to protect it? And can we all agree that it's worth far more than it might cost to protect that? And if that's the case, or of sufficient parties, then how can we fund that? And structuring the agreements and facilitating the collaboration and partnership is what Blue Forest is all about. So we have a science team, a finance team, and a project development team. They all work hand in hand. And we do everything in collaboration with other organizations. And I met Jen again in cohort 2, Jen Nevels. And it was so great how Watershed Solutions Network facilitated collaboration amongst many different interested parties, even with that ethos back then, that there's more shared, we have more in common than separates us. And that there's often not enough dialogue. I think a lot of what should be envisioned starts with people in collaboration. And to facilitate collaboration at scale is often what are the agreements and what does collaboration look like? And for a water agency, that has to be very different than the Forest Service or than the private sector, like insurance companies or water dependent companies or counties. And so the beautiful thing about a watershed, as we're all here, is it provides so many benefits to so many things that we care deeply about. The really hard thing is that no one party is often economically responsible or with the resources to address that. In other words, like the same type of aspirational intervention can address and support local interests, regional interests, state interests, federal interests, private interests. And so how do we help support that collaboration? And that's Blue Forest is a part of that. We play a key role, I think, but it has to be in collaboration of bringing people together. And how we often operate, because we don't plan projects, although we like to model the benefits and outcomes of those activities to then help communicate and market them, we often work within a forest collaborative setting or a collaborative group. And that's the social, it starts with that type of collaboration of intention and aspiration, which is people getting together and facilitating that. And that's so much a WSN motivation. And I both learned a lot. Thank you, Odin. I'd like to see you on this call because one of our trainers and facilitators, who I'm so grateful for. What are the things that are motivating us as individuals? What is motivating us together? Story of us. And then the story of now is how do we mobilize those resources and capital? That was some of the training that I was thinking about as people were sharing before us, is that getting our stories together is so impressive, so important to be able to share what's motivating us. And in fact, it can even be important not to assume other people share our values, but to be able to talk about shared purpose and shared values and try and identify where is that overlap, right? Blue Forest originally started, a lot of people say, well, we want to do this conservation work because it's the right thing to do. And that may be very, very true and resonate with me deeply, for example. But it may not be the type of value proposition or thing that a water agency may necessarily be able to participate, right? Because Nick thinks this is important, we're going to do that. That typically doesn't fly amongst other, different agencies and entities that are having to steward and govern resources. It has to be positioned within a credible framework around what's in their shared interest and what's necessary to facilitate that collaboration. So I might end a little bit with saying, really grateful for this collaboration to be here with Water Solutions Network, helping to facilitate, like, what is it that we want to do in this watershed? And highlighting all of the work that many parties have done before that, but maybe the glue around what can be accomplished, it really can be supported through that facilitation. I think then what does each party need to see to find it compelling to participate and share? Then what is it going to cost, perhaps, to try and achieve this, whether in a phased approach or holistically across the whole watershed? And how do we pay for that and what do the agreements and collaboration look like? And again, that's collaboration is hard, right? The people have different timelines, people have different definitions of success, um, people have different budgetary availability at different times, and Blue Forest sees itself as a bit of a financial intermediary to help facilitate that collaboration. And following the lead of what's desired by all the parties is the best way to achieve success, rather than to try and push something that Nick wants. It's actually what should it involve, what should be involved here. So we have, I'll finish with, we have initially 3 pilot projects going with Metropolitan Water. They're quite small in the grand scheme of things, but they're quite large in how business is usually done. I mean, they're $1 million of commitments from Metropolitan, with other parties sharing in the costs like CAL FIRE, DWR, others shared in, especially with Metropolitan taking an interest in a lead to participate. That motivated other interest across the state to join, which is really exciting. That's a really good snowball to have going down the hill. At the same time, the overall need in the Plumas, from a lot of different estimates, is well into over hundreds of millions of dollars that would provide durable benefits over, decades of time. And so how do we think about funding that and making the necessary value proposition, not just to Metropolitan Water, certainly, but to the Forest Service, to the state, to local interests, to bottling and water-dependent companies, to the technology sector, to public health, perhaps, and to others. Like there's a lot of shared results that can be celebrated that are both important for what we deeply care about, and they're economically relevant to many parties. And so how do we achieve some of those win-win-win opportunities? And being a part of a collaboration is definitely where it starts. So thank you for the opportunity to share, and look forward to talking more.
Thanks, Nick. So I can imagine that some folks are sitting in the audience thinking, "Wow, those were some long introductions." But Nick already leapt to the punchline. We value knowing people's stories, because that's where we start to build common ground. So I'd really, all of us, the 5 of us, were in the upper watershed last week together. And I would love to invite the group to reflect on that experience. Anything surprising, anything inspiring, anything you thought, gosh, maybe we stumbled on this, or we could have done that. But I just would like to open it up to all the participants in the panel to offer your reflections.
Well, I think
Actually,
it was I think it was quite telling, Debbie, that we had a few people from down south come up this late summer, and evidently we must have provided enough of a quality experience that they went home and brought back a busload.
that's right. They flew up a busload.
Yeah, so if I would love to just since it was a Metropolitan sponsored trip, and just to give the context, Metropolitan Water District, like I said, has been around for 100 years. It's within our administrative code that our board of directors go on an annual basis and inspect our infrastructure, learn more about our infrastructure. And so we've been doing what we call inspection tours for decades. And we do some sort of in our service area that are just like a day long, go look at our recycled water plant or go look at this treatment facility. But our major inspection trips have been basically in 2 areas. One is inspecting the Colorado River Aqueduct, which, as I mentioned, we built in the 30s. And then the other kind of category is the state water project infrastructure. And so for decades, we've been going up there with groups of people and including our board members to look at the Bay Delta, Oroville Dam, and the infrastructure around the state water project in that part of California. And so this trip last week was the first time that Metropolitan expanded its state water project inspection tour to acknowledge the source watershed of the State Water Project, and to take, as Paul said, a busload of people up into the upper watershed to meet with people like Paul and Trina and other local experts and community members and officials and foresters to talk about the challenges that they're facing in that watershed and how that's impacting their communities, and some of the opportunities that we have to work together. And, as Nick said, we have these pilot demonstration projects where right now Metropolitan is putting in a little bit of money along with some other utilities and agencies in order to kind of demonstrate the value that we all know we get out of really us being involved in the forest health, community health, and resilience efforts up there in the watershed. So and all I've heard is extremely positive feedback from this first trip up into the watershed. So I want to thank you, the hosts and organizers, all again for making it just such a rewarding experience for everyone that was there.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize that by hosts, I mean, that's local leaders. And I also want to give a shout out to the fact that we've got a bunch of them also participating. So, like Sally and Christy and other folks and thank you, Kevin, for already commenting on your experience. Feel free to add your thoughts and comments in the chat too, about how you experienced the trip.
I would just, from my perspective, I think none of us really quite knew what to expect. And I think one of the surprising things was that the folks from Southern California didn't either. And I will say that some of us met Thursday evening for dinner. And so I arrived there a little bit earlier than the bus when it was a little delayed by the Reno traffic coming out of Reno at rush hour. And so I hurried into the restroom so I wouldn't have to do that later after the group got there. And when I came out, there was a woman waiting for me. She's like, "Oh," and she introduced herself as Yvette. And so I was a little surprised at how well planned out their integration and introduction into their team was, and which was fantastic. It was very much, the people I think that they knew were going to be there. They were very good at introducing like myself and other people to their team, which was fantastic. And so they're people from San Marino, San Fernando, and East LA, primarily, along with other people. It was just felt very much person to person without like just getting to know each other more than anything else. And the location, yes, but like, who are we, and how do we, and do we even want to build something together? But that person to person relationship is what stayed with me the most.
And I'll just add that I appreciated getting to meet folks from Metwater and others that came along on the trip. I would have loved to have met more, but hopefully there will be future opportunities. And I just reflect back on a time that I stopped on my drive to Southern California at the big I think it's DWR at Lake Castic, the big interpretive center or visitor center that is there, and kind of go through there. And this was quite a few years ago, 15 maybe, to see reference to Upper Feather River water, because, we all up here are aware of the connection to the State Water Project. And there, I couldn't find much of anything. It just stopped at Lake Oroville. And always sort of like for 20 years or more that I've been here, where there's always this, desire, like, how can we tell our story better and get folks that where these water deliveries go recognize, where the upper watersheds and the need for restoration and other projects in investment. And so it's it's great to see a step in, I feel like, that direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing, what where this goes from here.
Christy, you might be heartened by a quick anecdote. So I was invited to participate in the rest of the tour down the to the Delta, and there was someone doing a presentation on the Delta, and they said, the water comes out of the Delta, and then it goes into the State Water Project. And I raised my hand and I said, "Where does the water come from?" And the person presenting was a little bit confused. But one of the mayors, she was standing behind me and she said, "It comes from the upper feather." So it is, people were there, they saw it, and they're already spreading the word. Liz or Nick or Paul, any reflections?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate the opportunity to visit. The chairman he was a very interesting guy, and I guess we did create enough of a vision for him to go down and bring his people back, and I appreciate them coming this way as opposed to replicating something they'd done in the previous times. So I greatly appreciate it, and I think that yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to go down and see how their infrastructure works down there.
Paul, and I'll just add, I so appreciate how welcoming local leadership and people in the Plumas that I've met have been. That was just felt like an opportunity to learn, to share more. And one of my takeaways was being in the woods together with people from all over, especially when it was dry one of those days. You can't beat that. That's pretty great for connecting around a common interest. And I think everyone had maybe more fun than they were expecting too.
So, what is one hope you have for what this it doesn't, but if you could imagine, let's say 3 years from now, how does this play and what do we accomplish together?
Well, in my mind, it's just showing that we are, continuing to try to do the best we can for our watershed and improve the quality of water and quantity with whatever resources that we can glean. And if they see the benefits in the true partnership, I think that we can coordinate some benefits that will increase the quality and quantity of water going forward. And that's the hope, is that they'll see that we truly are good stewards, and we just we do all we can with what we have, and what we have is the limiting factor. So that is the point that I understand they're not going to throw a bunch of money at us, but even the fact that they support what we're doing gives us some political clout and some leverage, showing that we are true good stewards, and that the money is not it is well spent here as opposed to other places.
I would
Go
I
ahead.
would definitely agree with that. And to me, it felt like the beginning of that loop that for us in the Upper Feather River watershed, knowing that the water flowing by us belonged to somebody else through water rights or, through contract agreements. But they didn't even know that we existed or that this river existed. And now they're becoming aware of that, and that they somewhere in their minds that, oh, there's stewardship, reciprocity, that at some level we need to do that. And so, yeah, some of it might be economic or financial, but also those population issues when it comes to voting and policy issues, as they become more aware of it, that when it comes to some of the rural issues that we really struggle with, that we will have more, I would say, political awareness with population bases that we've needed for so many years, and some of those inequities, that those circles will become more of a full circle as well. I'm really excited and hopeful for that when it comes to voting and even policies and things like that, that some of those things change. And when we looked at that watershed framework that Debbie talked about earlier, I was part of those discussions as well, that in order for those watershed frameworks to come into to be actualized, these types of circles need to be circles and not broken open cups with a lot of evaporation going on. So, and then on the tribal side of it, it's just incredibly frustrating. And I think I used a kind of a term when trying to describe the tribes in this area. It's like this area, as far as water goes, we're in a granitic zone, basalt and granitic, where water, except for like this, there's some groundwater basins, but for the most part, they just filter right through, right? And so, like tribally, we're very, very fractured too, and that somehow we find that as a strength. That is the strength of the Upper Feather River, and tribally, we are not engaged at all in most cases on a lot of the forest health projects. I'm on the Fire Safe Council board, on a lot of the projects, discussions, policy issues, because we're not federally recognized. Like me, the reason I'm even in this discussion is because I've shown up most of my life at the table over and over and over again on my own dime. I just haven't gone away till Fire Safe Council said, "Hey, do you want to become a board member? You're here all the time." So I said, "Sure." And but when it comes right down to it, I don't have the backing of a federally recognized tribe when it comes to organizations, NGOs setting up projects, even though it's in a place that I know very well. I know the cultural sites. I don't get asked to participate or paid to participate because they're contracting with a different organization or tribe. And when I go out there, or my family members go out there, there are sites that are destroyed because we don't get asked. And so that is something that I'm hopeful to see change, that there be a way for the non-federally recognized tribes and communities to be engaged. And it can happen. We're smart enough as human beings to recognize the person sitting next to us, or in the Zoom, or, at the school, has a voice and should be included if they want to be in any project. And so those are the things that I really hope to see change today. I don't want to wait for another 3 years. And yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts? And then I'll just want to prepare folks because we're gonna take a group picture momentarily. So if you didn't want to be in the picture, now's your time to turn off your camera, and you can make yourself anonymous if you'd like.
Debbie,
But go ahead, Nick.
I might share too. I didn't quite get, just as a closing, like what would be amazing in 3 years.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, please do
Just
that.
wanted to add that,
Yeah.
especially based on what's been shared, has been really encouraging and motivating as always. And thank you, Trina and Paul, for that, and Liz as well. One opportunity is within 3 years. I think it's really viable to have, maybe sooner, a shared definition of what success looks like, as well as the connectivity socially for individual entities to be able to share what success looks for them. So there's transparency and trust around that. There maybe not all aspects of success are shared, but it can all be communicated. And because I think there's aspects of any of these programmatic visions that would meet each entity, right? And how to be compelling. I think with that shared definition of success in 3 years, like what's a well-resourced plan to have that vision be possible and viable? Like, and what's the strategy? What's a shared strategy around that, how to attempt that? Because I think it also includes a lot of parties that aren't here, like Pacific Gas and Electric. The Feather River is called the Staircase of Power, not because of Led Zeppelin or whatever might have been a motivation for naming that river in such a way, but that there's so many generating entities that for PG&E that generate revenue for them, right? Like real revenue that's important to protect, at least if that's the plan. I think we also need to have a shared vision of the capacity to then achieve that. So not just funding, but like this is a big jobs first need if they were to achieve this at scale, right? That's exciting. That's like the best type. That's transitioning to a restoration and resilience economy that's should be local and to the benefit of the communities that are around and in the Plymouth. Um, and then lastly, I'd get really excited about how we communicate that as like a shared communication strategy to celebrate that. I think awareness around this type of model here could be so powerful and inspiring for the rest of California, the rest of the country, how to collaborate from urban to rural and everywhere in between, from natural resource management and ways that are resilience building. So like there's a lot to happen here. I'm so grateful for all the parties that are interested in collaboration. So thank you. I had to get out what excites me most, Debbie, before we moved on. But this is an inspiring group, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, no, thank you for I paused. I'm the worst at those pregnant pauses. Liz, did you get a chance? I think we I
Thanks, Debbie. I mean, I love what's been said, and I think, um, you know, I feel really confident that there's going to be some real opportunities in this partnership to, better kind of understand each other's sort of challenges, but also what we all bring to the table as far as, and protecting and ensuring that these watersheds in California continue to function ecologically. And for Metropolitan, it really is a paradigm shift. And so when I think about what I'm hoping for at Met is, I mean, you've got people like Jen Nevels that's been saying this for years, and she definitely has some others, in the organization that are all in, and we've got our board chair all in, but we have some work to do to make this, to really build on this momentum, to really communicate the importance of thinking about our mission in terms of the watersheds that we rely on, and how important it is to think about, again, that natural infrastructure. And so that's definitely a goal of mine, is to really change the way that that Met is thinking about its responsibilities. Um, in addition to some real concrete on the ground success in the upper watershed to help benefit communities there, as well as the downstream folks that rely on it.
All right, so now we'll shift to closing, and we're going to keep them short because I want to give folks a chance to get into those breakouts. Or we could call it. I think that's good too. Um, Maybe what I'll invite is we'll bring you all back after the breakouts, and then you can also reflect on what folks talked about in the breakouts. I do just want to offer too that this is the beginning of a test drive, and our hope is over the next 3 years that we'll start piecing in the other parts of this very big watershed, and we'll have built such a strong culture between the Upper Feather and Southern California, that as we bring new folks in, they adapt to this new culture of valuing the health of a watershed and valuing human relationships as the foundation of collaboration. So I'm going to unspotlight you all for the moment. And then I believe Alyssa is going to um, so if you are not on camera, we invite you to be in. Gosh, I see so many people. I know this is so exciting. We invite you to come on to on camera so that you can be visible in our picture. I do feel like we are doing something, like we're going to look back on this 5, 10 years from now, and we were all here in the beginning, and I think it's going to have blossomed by then. And it'll be cool to be part of the in crowd that was here in the beginning. Anyone else wanna turn on their camera? All right, Alyssa, I'll hand it off to you to.
All right, I'll take a couple since we're such a big group. 1, 2, 3, smile. And then one more. 1, 2, 3, smile. All right, we're good to go.
All right, so I think we'll break into 5 groups, Alyssa. We're going to give you a half hour to talk about, the watershed framework. I mean, you can make this a broader conversation just about how we get to this more connected world where our human systems are more aligned with our natural systems.
Okay.
I love how we come back and people are laughing and still mid-sentence.
Yes.
We definitely were.
Well, welcome back, everyone. So we have about 20 minutes left. So this is going to be quick and efficient report backs from each of the groups. And I think we're just going to dive right in with group 1. Who is the reporter for group 1?
Me.
All right, Eileen. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, everybody. Group 1, we had Paul. Okay, so a lot of you already heard the stories and answered some of those questions. We had Cindy, I forgot your last name already, Ramsey, and we had Jen Neville and myself. So the first question, Paul and Cindy felt that the watershed framework has been the vehicle to share the stories, their stories of stewardship and how hard they work, what a good job is they're doing. And Watershed Solutions Network, it has the connections and the clout and the ability to amplify those stories. And it's provided that framework that allows all these conversations to happen up and down the state. So that necessary structure to build those relationships. And it goes kind of with number 5 too, because I am excited about, I just found out through Jen that Paul said he's going to make it down to Southern California, so that pinning that, in my mind, I pinned that, oh, Paul, get down here, that trip to do the reverse inspection trip. And WSN is part of facilitating those conversations to help make that happen. Not the only player, clearly. But anyway, that maybe there is a reverse watershed framework, even on a small scale, for one of the many sub-watersheds and tens of millions of people down here that receive your water and need to know the story, Paul, of how hard you work every day stewarding the lands, the forests, the rivers for the water quantity and quality. My neighbors need to know that, so they'll stop suing Western Municipal Water District over the cost of increasing their water, but that you're working hard to ensure that we get water down here. So those are all kind of flip-floppy related answers to 1 and 5. And I think everyone's heard Paul's stories about how the watershed framework fits into his work. And Jen is, on the front lines as well, at Met anyway, closer to the source. And we didn't get into number 3, but clearly there's room for that. Number 4 is just how to improve the framework. Let's continue to build that trust. So trust is an important word that has come up in multiple contexts today. And continue to get better at telling the story and sharing and educating and showing that what happens up there benefits us all. I would love to see little sound bites or the little map vignettes, something that's easily like shareable on social media, so I can tell my neighbors, look at, this is Paul. He's a rancher and a firefighter. And guess what? Your water comes from his land, the rain that falls on his land. And I don't know, it takes talent to, storyboard all of that and create the artwork and whatever. It sounds like WSN has the talent, but Paul's story should be shared. And I hope people from the local communities who receive State Water Project water meet him in January or in some future date, or at least get to see a video of him or a picture of him hard at work stewarding our water. So, thank you. Did I miss anything, guys?
All right, thank you, group 2. And Eileen, let's keep, I'm with you. Let's keep brainstorming and figuring out how we amplify when folks are visiting Southern California. And you are very artistic. I may have some ideas. All right, group 2.
Hi, everybody. Dan Kearns from Plymouth County. So we talked about the skepticism, right, and the lack of trust between rural communities and Met Water and LA Power and Water, and how historically some distasteful things were done for them to acquire their water. And so that is part of this. I hope that's something that Water Solutions Network, or this framework, can do, right, is to build some trust based on actual actions, not on nice, pretty, fluffy words. And think about how we can benefit from each other, right? And we talked about how, a lot of our decisions are made based on the bottom line and not what's best for our children's children, right? And how changing that point of view could be really beneficial to ensure that our kids have at least what we have now, if not more. We talked about how the Feather River watershed is really critical because of how much water comes from here and how many people that it serves. And so then we talked a little bit, number 2, right? The health of our watersheds and how, particularly in the burned areas, right? How fire affects the health of the water, not just the health and the quality of the water, but the amount of water that comes from those watersheds. We also talked about the ungodly amount of pesticides and herbicides that are used to control the brush that moves in after the fire, right? And alternative ways to mitigate that. But I'm sure that the people of Southern California don't want to be drinking Roundup saturated drinking water, right? And so getting some of that out of our standard operating procedure would be pretty awesome. Also the erosion, I just came to mind, we were talking about PG&E and all those things, and the threat of erosion in the Feather River Canyon from the mountains above PG&E's stairway of power infrastructure. If those hillsides gave way, which they might at any time, right, PG&E could lose a lot of that infrastructure. Right? We didn't really do too much on 3. For how could the framework be improved? Ensuring that projects account for climate impacts, potentially irreversible impacts on water supplies, like deforestation, right? That can actually cause water supply to decrease. We talked about it at our current average number of acres burned per year. In less than 30 years, all of the forested land in California will be burned if we continue at our current rate. And so that some of that comes to, a lot of that land is Forest Service land, and that the Forest Service really needs to change the way they manage their land. Otherwise, it might not be here for very much longer. We covered the invasive species. And then that time is of the essence here, right? And I think that's it. Lee, you got cut off right at the end there. And anybody else from the group have anything else to add? Anything I missed? Or Lee, did you want to finish up your thoughts as we came out?
Yeah, since I'm in the fuel reduction, wildfire prevention practice, and I'm a past experience in the watershed, so I see, one watershed and also fuel reduction, wildfire prevention should work together. That can, do both anyway. So that's my, watershed solution plus fuel reduction. If we have a master plan, one's on low point, one's on high point, do a master plan, intervene together, that would be beautiful approach.
Well, great.
Yeah, and lastly, I think
go ahead,
I
Dan.
hope that like this can't, the people who live in this area, that I'm very grateful to be surrounded by people who have been living off the land successfully for generations. And they have incredible techniques and knowledge for how they do that. And they disagree with most of the standard procedures that are being used to manage our land, right? So how can we give them a voice? How can we give the ranchers and the people who are effective, not just managing land that's burning catastrophically, but people who are effectively managing the land, the voice they need and the opportunity to share that wisdom with the rest of us? Thank you.
Thank you, Group 2. And so Group 3, you're up. And unfortunately, we're running short on time. So 3, 4, and 5, if you can just don't repeat anything that's already been said and skip to the highlights.
I'm with you, Debbie. I'm Marty Walters,
Hi, Marty.
representing Group 3. We had Karen Burr, Mary McDonald, and Sally McGowan in there. And I am not going to repeat anything. I'm going to focus on demographics. We really talked a lot about the fact that a lot of people who are working in Plumas County are doing portfolio work. They're retired and volunteering and working extra, or, several jobs and also volunteering on the side. So I think that demographic question is really interesting because our peak number of people in this county, full-time residents, was in 2010, and we're now starting to slide down that hill. And then the other thing we talked a lot about was sort of, even though we're aging and that we have a lot of sort of retired and second homeowners that are not super engaged with the next generation and with schools, we have to push against that and really focus on that next generation and engaging with our schools and focusing on children and younger folks in the county as we go forward and implement some of these programs. And how we do that, I think, requires a lot of talking and fancy words in addition to action. So I think one of the things I've been really learning this year is how much talking and collaborating it takes to get projects done. It's a lot.
All right. Thank you, Marty, and Group 2. I mean, Group 3, sorry. Group 4.
Okay, great. I'm reluctantly the presenter, but I am for a moment. I had Deborah Rasmussen, Mike De La Salle, and Jordan and Geneva from Upstream Ecology. And it was a fun discussion. We sort of leaned on question 1 for a while and a lot of discussion. I guess in different ways, we had answers for what could be most helpful and what do we think about the framework. And one of the items to be most helpful is, how do we know if we're doing the framework? How do we know if we're on it? And what does that involve? So sort of guidance around that, and resources, materials, process. That was one idea. There's one question around, well, how the Plumas Corp has been here for a long time, and they maybe have an index of all sorts of opportunities. That could be really helpful. What role might be available or like helpful for that type of work? I'd bring up Sierra Institute, tribal workforce capacity, right? Like, this is an all hands on deck, and how can the framework facilitate or coordinate that and be a part of that, I think, was the nature of those questions. there's also the opportunities to identify, there's a lot of great science coming out around process-based restoration, beaver mimicry, floodplain, and meadow restoration. And I think the question was, well, how can some of the programs, like there's one called Fuels to Flow, help inform how this could work? That was pretty fun. And then the last comment was pulling in tribes as early as possible is so essential and can help have a holistic vision to lead to much better outcomes. So, anything folks in my group want to add? I went through that quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. And group 4, and now we're on to group 5.
I was in group 5 with Trina Cunningham and Keith Martin, and we were only able to get to question 1, so it might be a bit redundant, but we just got one question. So we said that how the watershed framework could be most helpful. It facilitates the reimagining of how our watersheds function. It creates collaborative, mutually beneficial, restorative water rights and practices within California. It could help folks in understanding sources, human uses, and natural ecosystem needs and functions in California, as well as it creates a strong united force of people to influence water policy in the state. And ultimately, it facilitates the sharing of diverse perspectives to create a large holistic overview of work that needs to be done, and then breaks it down into smaller goal-specific groups that can actually implement project work. And that's all we have.
Well, great. Thank you, group 5. And we will take all of your notes and put them all back together into one document and send information back out at you. For our panelists, I'd like to give you each 30 seconds for final closing thoughts. And I think we'll start with you, Liz.
Thanks, Debbie. Well, just first of all, I really appreciate the feedback and hearing from all of you and what you think about the framework. And just acknowledging again that, my role here is to, come to the table as Metropolitan in the most authentic way possible, but also it's on me and Jen and our colleagues to bring this agency along, because we recognize that we have, some baggage that we just have to own and take that and move forward in collaboration and build the trust. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Paul, are you ready to go?
Yeah, no, thank you guys for facilitating this, and I would like to thank them for coming up here and thank them for providing us the opportunity to come down there and cross-pollinate what's actually going on in the world.
That was quick. Thank you. All right, Nick.
Thank you, everyone. Do appreciate learning something every time that there's discussion around how things can be done with the shared vision. And I appreciate the openness for sharing. And I really appreciate mentioning, I'm recognizing the history and sometimes challenges of the past. I think that can help us look forward. And as an outsider myself, from all of that, it's really helpful context to know sort of what is the right roles for different parties to help support a shared initiative. And I appreciate the definition of that as we continue to go on. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. And Trina.
Yeah, so I am excited. I've been working on water things for a long time, and when I've tried to explain it to some of the people in my community, I've explained it, but to actually have more people in my community see it and participate in it is really exciting. It's never been fun to be the only one, and now I feel like the community's growing, and also being able to highlight that work that we've done in the Upper Feather River as a diverse community and seeing the diversity of Southern California and starting that conversation is really, really exciting to me. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Trina. And so thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you for participating. And we are looking forward to continuing to build this together. So again, we'll put the notes together and share them back out. And we'll be following up on opportunities to do things like amplify the Upper Feather River folks' voices when they're down in Southern California. We're looking for new watersheds to work in. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you all informed whether you like it or not, probably. So thank you all, and we'll see some of you up in the Upper Watershed in December, and look forward to seeing the rest of you around our workshops and programming. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.